Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's UK Column News. It's Wednesday the 29th of April 2015, just after 1 o'clock. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. And the weather, everybody reporting pretty wet and showery. It's pretty grim in Plymouth, it has to be said, and pretty grim in the financial sector as well. So we're going to start off with Barclays Bank, setting aside £800 million, they say, to cover future potential legal action and so-called fines for the alleged foreign exchange manipulation. And this news came as they announced profits for the last quarter of £1.34 billion, but that was down mainly because of this and other one-off payments. So there was £150 million also set aside for mis-selling payment protection insurance. And of course, that new £800 million set aside brings the total set aside for foreign exchange fraud to just over £2 billion. And PPI has so far cost the bank £5 billion. Barclays say they have changed their ways, of course, but they say that they manage their risk much better and they aren't really mis-selling anything anymore, so that's good. I hope they keep it up. Of course, if our politicians were managing risk a little better, we'd break up the banks in the way that was done in the USA following Glass-Steagall. And speaking of risk, perhaps insurance companies should be considering managing it a bit better as well, because the FT here reporting that, quotes, the $575 billion reinsurance industry that protects insurers from earthquakes, hurricanes and other disasters risks a banking-style meltdown if it continues making what are being called dangerous changes on how it's structured. And this is according to the Cass Business School. And they have found that the reinsurance industry is packaging up disasters. They're packaging up disasters in a similar way that mortgage companies were packaging up mortgages prior to the financial crash in 2007. And as a result, the victims of a costly catastrophe such as an earthquake would run into problems if they were expecting any kind of payout. That's what's being claimed, so that's nice for them, isn't it? But staying with sort of economic issues, the BBC here, this is a fantastic article, the curious case of low unemployment. And it's fantastic because, of course, this question about low unemployment has been asked so many times before, since 2008, and including by us, in fact. And it's also been answered many times. And as the BBC says here, they feel it's time to bring this question up again. And as they say here, the main reason, of course, is because there's so much self-employment. Let's not mention 0 hours contracts, but they're focusing on self-employment. And they're also focusing on how great self-employment is. Don't worry about the poverty, they say, or the long hours. It's really very satisfying to be self-employed. Well, of course, self-employment is satisfying if you're driven with a great business idea. If you're forced into it as a result of the long-term economic disaster, I think that's a different story. As we reported back in February, Tax Research UK published an analysis of the financial situation for self-employed people, showing that 77% of the self-employed are, in fact, in poverty. And if we zoom in on that table a little bit, what they were demonstrating was that the income that people received from self-employment was really insufficient to meet their needs. And in fact, people who were considered self-employed were also needing to take on second jobs. And also that table demonstrated that that there were quite a number of people with pensions also required to be self-employed. So in fact, their pensions weren't actually providing a proper income for them, and they were needing to also have a second income through self-employment. So really, the BBC pushing this piece of propaganda that self-employment is a great success for the current Tory government. I don't think that's a terribly accurate representation. Now, of course, in contrast to the situation, the long-term economic disaster that we have in Britain, in some third world countries, namely Egypt, they have an economic plan, a long-term economic plan. And last year, Egypt announced a sort of Bradbury Pound type project in order to fund the building of a second Suez Canal. Now, it wasn't specifically along the model of the Bradbury Pound because they didn't issue new currency to do it. Instead, they offered government bonds at interest but they only offered those bonds, certificates, whatever you want to call them, to members of the public. So corporates need not apply, is what they said. And it was absolutely massively oversubscribed. So although these bonds were issued at interest, the interest payments go back to the people that invested in the thing in the first place. And of course, in this case, that's the public. The news from this article and other articles is that they have already completed the dry excavation work for the second canal. They're on track for the inauguration of the canal in August. The point that I would simply make here is Egypt is capable of doing this, and what do? We permit our politicians to deny us the Bradbury pound and that policy of national credit, and thus deny ourselves a productive future. And as a result, we can expect more zero-hour contracts and more self-employment and more crumbling infrastructure. So that is a fantastic future for us. I guess we will soon be the third world country. And indeed we will if politicians continue to get their way. Paul Craig Roberts here, really pretty vociferous in his criticism of the European Union, and particularly the European People's Party, which is the largest political group in the European Parliament, and it is the party behind the nomination of Jean-Claude Juncker as President of the European Commission. What they're basically calling for is war with Russia, so that's nice. Time of talk and persuasion with regards to Russia is over, according to MEP and Vice President of the European People's Party. But anyway, they are pushing for this. And if Paul Craig Roberts isn't enough evidence for this, well, here we've got Euractiv, the media company that really focuses on European issues, talking about exactly the same thing. I think I need to add that the continuing rhetoric from from ex-NATO head Anders Fogh Rasmussen, really also, if you keep an eye out for that, he's been publishing in various places in the last couple of weeks. It really makes sure that the hair on your back of your neck stand on end. So clearly the rhetoric absolutely on the cards for war with Russia, where none of us is in a position, no country in the West is in a position to actually prosecute any such war, but they keep the pressure on anyway. Okay, adverts. Let's remind ourselves that on Friday, 1st of May, we're taking back common law. That is what the title of the event is. Now, many people are asking what is actually going to happen on the 1st of May, and of course, that is not yet clear. And there's good reason for that. We don't want to give anybody any sort of prior warning of what may happen on the day. But I'm sure there's quite a lot of things organised. Please get along to that if you can. And obviously on the 2nd of May, also in Nottingham, the Great British Mortgage Swindle, the film has been made, is having another viewing in the Savoy Cinema in Nottingham at midday. So get along to that if you can. And don't forget, don't forget AV6. So I'm going to give myself a rest just by playing the promotional video for that once again. I'll see you in a minute or so.
So I've been watching and 9/11 was just an incredible mind control event. You know, it was apparent to me then, as it is today, that people are literally mind controlled, that they're not actually thinking for themselves. Most of us are simply regurgitating.
We live in a bubble, and a lot of times, until you remove yourself from that bubble, you don't even know you're living in a bubble, in a kind of an information prison in the West.
But these guys have got a lot of money, and we complain about McDonald's and all that sort of thing. Do you know why they've got so much money? Because we fucking buy their shit. So it's time to stop it. People say to me, where do we go? What's the first step? Stop supporting the companies that don't give a shit.
Be who you are. Don't police your thoughts, and don't police your expression. Express yourself, but work for something positive. Express yourself in a positive way, Create a better world because you're in it. Now, what is your legacy that you leave behind? Is the world better because you were here? Or is it worse because you were here? Or did you just not participate? Because you have to participate, you really do.
Okay, welcome back. Next thing is this article from Public Finance. Parties urge to reform council tax. So the next government, they say, must reform council tax in England to end the absurd situation of basing it on relative values in 1991. And this is according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And in its analysis, they're saying that they're analysing the tax and welfare plans of the various parties that were published, and they're highlighting that no party is proposing a rational and long overdue change. Well, of course, one rational and long overdue change that might apply here is to actually ascertain whether it's lawful or legal or not, and of course, many of us know the answer to that. The IFS is basically saying that it's a ridiculous situation, that there is a cap on the amount of council tax that people with more expensive properties are required to pay. I would say that perhaps as well as looking at that, you might want to look at whether councils are actually lawfully collecting council tax in the first place, or whether they're lawfully using the courts if people aren't paying council tax. There's a whole bunch of other questions with regard to council tax, but whether it should be reformed to get some people to pay more or not, that's another question. The very big question is what actually happens to the money, and of course it's not being spent where we think it's being spent, I suspect. Institute for Fiscal Studies, perhaps we want to look at some of these questions first before we start looking at restructuring how much money is charged to people. Of course, the UK government now being ordered to to clean up Britain's toxic air, according to the Supreme Court ordering the UK government to do that. Now, this ruling means that the next government has to spell out new plans for reducing toxic levels of pollutants, according to politics.co.uk here. But of course, London is already talking about extending the legislation around the so-called low emissions zone, and they're talking about banning cars over 7 years old and motorcycles, in fact, over 7 years old from entering central London, even if you're a resident. And in Paris already there are regular 70km/h speed limits, 70 kilometers per hour, so what is that, about 40 miles an hour, speed limits on the ring road and other major roads through the city on a regular basis. And indeed, in some cases, roads have been closed in recent months in order to improve air quality, they say. So this is clearly a city agenda, possibly a European policy, but one which is clearly being pushed in London. Anybody with a car over 7 years old is going to have, if I remember correctly, a year to replace it once this legislation comes into force. And I believe that is by 2017. I could be wrong. Please check that if you want. That's what's coming. Now, of course, the child sexual abuse scandal, if you want to call it that, continues. More news coming out about Jimmy Savile. This time that he abused at least 22 children at a school, Duncroft School, in the 1970s. This is in Staines. The abuse took place, according to the Telegraph here, the abuse took place all over the premises, including in the dining room and even the principal's office. But of course, nobody knew anything about it. And that's according to victims who were witnessed by police. An investigation into the extent of Savile's abuse at the school was found that he visited the approved school in Staines in January 1974 and made at least 15 other visits over the 5 years, according to the Telegraph, and they identified at least 46 separate offences. But nobody knew anything about it. This is just being trickled out and trickled out and trickled out over time in order to try to keep the lid on this thing. They will not give us the information about Savile in one go because they know, or indeed any of the other offenders in one go, because they know what the effect of that is going to be. So they're going to trickle this out over the next several years, I believe. In the meantime, Exaro here reporting that 69 MPs or prospective MPs, so either MPs that are up for re-election or election candidates, have now signed up to, or at least are calling for, the DPP to reconsider the Janner the Janner prosecution. 69 MPs and prospective MPs, that's sort of 650 MPs up for re-election. and so what, 7 main parties all standing for election in each seat. So you can work out how many people we're talking about here, and 69 of them have called for the DPP to rethink this. I think there's something very wrong here. And why are constituents not absolutely at these people's throats and demanding that they force Alison Saunders to reverse her decision? I can't quite understand it. Perhaps there's a complete lack of engagement, and well, maybe we'll understand a bit more about why that is later on. But anyway, Alison Saunders herself comes under even more pressure, and this is just staggering because, of course, Alison Saunders, Common Purpose graduate Alison Saunders, more questions, according to the Telegraph, about the oversight of the Crown Prosecution Service, because it turns out that Kevin McGinty, who takes up the post of Her Majesty's Inspector of the CPS next month, actually is a friend of Alison Saunders, and in fact has been a friend of Alison Saunders for 20 years. So I couldn't actually find any evidence that Mr. McGinty is a Common Purpose graduate, but I mean, many of these jobs do end up being handed out on the basis of Common Purpose membership. Well, if anybody can help with finding out whether he is Common Purpose or not, please let me know. Now, if you want to know more about the Common Purpose links to the cover-up of child sexual abuse, please get onto the UK Column website. This article was in the last newspaper. We've put it up on the website now. Please have a read at this. It gives a very good overview of what was happening in Nottingham. We've already got the Rotherham Common Purpose Effect article on the website. This is happening in just about every city in the country. And this type of network, which is protecting paedophiles and protecting abusers, is in just about every city in the country. So if you want to understand what's going on, you've got to read these 2 articles. Please distribute this as far and wide as you can. There's a PDF version of it available on that page for you to send around if you wish. But speaking of Nottingham and speaking of Common Purpose, well, the University of Nottingham Malaysia campus is partnering with Common Purpose to host Global Leadership Student Forum. So what they're saying here is that the forum provided a platform for students from universities in Malaysia to develop their leadership skills through project-based learning and an opportunity to network and learn from key industry leaders. And this was the University of Nottingham Malaysia campus partnering with Common Purpose, a UK-based charity responsible to provide development opportunities for people in work and society. Well, that's what they say they are. But as we demonstrate in our 2 Common Purpose Effect articles, they are at the absolute heart of the cover-up of this child sexual abuse in this country. And as we mentioned yesterday, they have links to abusers or have had members in the past, convicted paedophiles associated with that organisation. These type of secret societies have got to be dealt with. And until we do, we're going to continue to see this type of cover-up. And in fact, these inquiries never actually getting off the ground. Okay. This appeared this morning on ITV News and a host of other places. A new poll, this is from Scottish Television News poll, and what they're showing is that 54% of voters intend to vote for the Scottish Nationalist Party on May the 7th, and that's a rise of 2% since January. And basically what various news outlets today are saying is that this could mean that the Labour Party will not win a single seat in Scotland. And of course, that is absolutely going to result in more strength for Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP come the negotiations for the Rainbow Coalition, which, according to the Financial Times, we should celebrate. We should absolutely celebrate the oncoming Rainbow Coalition and the pot of gold that the next government will be bribed with by the corporations, no doubt. Apparently, it has been a conceit of the British that its electoral system was superior to others because it delivered decisive, unobstructed government. Well, that has all changed. And it's really interesting to note, as an aside, how in the past we have been told by our mainstream media that we are a 2-party or a 3-party state. But in fact, we now have 7 main parties, despite that the other 4 main parties don't have any seat. Well, it might have 1 or 2 through defections, but they don't have any seats of any great number in Parliament. We now have 7 main parties. And so the propaganda from the mainstream media absolutely heading us towards this rainbow coalition. But this FT article finishes off by saying, today's political leaders may also reflect that the present arrangements have produced a House of Commons hopelessly unrepresentative of the nation it's supposed to serve. Less than a quarter of its members are women and less than 5% are drawn from ethnic minorities. It's time, as they say, for change. But of course, the main thrust of this article is for constitutional change. Well, the constitutional change is almost unstoppable at this point, with everybody calling for English votes for English people, and devolution to the cities, and the removal of the Bill of Rights by replacing it with a new Bill of Rights, a new British Bill of Rights, which of course will be based on human rights rather than the inalienable rights that we already have, and so it goes on. This is. To suggest, by the way, that in this article for Philip Stevens to suggest that the Commons is unrepresentative of the people of this country, absolutely it is, because of course, what do our MPs represent? They represent the corporate interests and not their electorate in any case. So really, does it matter how many from ethnic minorities or how many women there are? Because it makes no difference to the actual outcome. So another in the raft of constitutional reform articles. And finally, I just wanted to have a laugh at Ian Duncan Smith, rightly embarrassed to turn up to his own hustings, so he was too scared. And this was because of the sister of David Clapson, who was the diabetic ex-soldier who died after having his benefits cut. And she was there to protest that, and so he was too scared to go and defend his record. Well, I have to say that if the voters of Chingford and Woodford Green re-elect this man, then they should be ashamed of themselves, and really, at the end of the day, we get what we deserve. And so I think on that note, I'm going to leave you for today. Tomorrow, Malcolm will be with me, I'm hoping. I believe he's on his way down. We'll have Justin Walker with me to discuss more financial stuff. So we'll see you then. Thanks for joining us.